What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tac-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him.
Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Muammar Gaddafi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles in Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I am your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Iconic or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate that. Hey, take time to share the podcast. My God, you're getting it for free. The least you can do is share it, you ungrateful bastards. But I appreciate your listening. The numbers are up. I'm honored. I'm humbled. All those things. Apparently, people are listening. I'm not just talking to myself like a maniac. I mean, I might be, but that's a whole different story. But listen, we can't do this show without the support of our sponsors. Chemical Free Body is a sponsor that's new to us, but we had Tim James on the show. He talked about health. He saved his own life by changing his diet and reworking his relationship with food. It's a fascinating episode to listen to, but they're also one of the sponsors here. So if you want to go check out their, I'm not saying go buy everything or anything, just go check out chemicalfreebody.com. Take a look at what he's doing, the things that the products that he's selling, the coaching, the training, all this stuff. It's really fascinating. The products that he sells are certified organic. They're plant-based. They're gluten-free. They're GMO-free, soy-free, dairy-free. The only thing that isn't free is the price. But I'll tell you what, we did a pretty good job. We've got a discount with Chemical Free Body. Just use the promo code MACRO. Any orders that you place in the United States that are over $99, you got free shipping. International shipping is available as well. And I'll tell you what, he's got a crazy guarantee. Double your price back if you buy something and you don't like it. Just send it back. He'll give you your money back plus the same amount that you spent. So double your money back. It's kind of a no-brainer. So check out Chemical Free Body. Make sure you use the promo code MACRO and get busy getting yourself healthy. Well, I'm excited. I'm excited for this one. I'm excited for all of the shows we do, but I'm especially excited for this one because we've got Ricky Varandas from The Ripple Effect and the 1/4 co-founder of what are we calling ourselves now? Union of the Unwanted. Sounds like a great metal band. Ricky, what's cooking? How are you?
What's up? The Union of the Unwanted is really picking up steam. I mean, people love it. Have you been getting
it's really funny.
Yeah, people are giving me tons of positive feedback. They're like, "Oh, this thing is awesome! When's the next one?" And I have a feeling like we're going to start getting more and more people asking to be on them. And I mean, Ryan from Last American Vagabond and Whitney Webb have made me liars because they've asked to be on every single one and haven't showed up to one yet. And I always get an apology email. And I'm always like, guys, nobody's going to believe me that you guys are going to actually show up to one of these things. But I think
they're the Bigfoot of the Union of the Unwanted. Always, we hear about them. We just never see them. Well, but we know Whitney's out there exposing deep corruption, and so is Ryan. So they get their hands full. I mean, God, never has there been a time where there's so much insanity going on. And I'm with you, man. I've gotten a lot of feedback there, like the union of the stuff you guys are doing is phenomenal. Midnight Mike was just on with Sam Tripoli. For those that don't know, it all started with a group 4-person podcast, you and me and Sam Tripoli from Tinfoil Hat and Midnight Mike from Our Big Dumb Mouth podcast, otherwise known as OBDM. And the 4 of us were chatting, and Mike, we're talking about censorship and how everything has come down hard on the alternative media. And Mike says we're like the union of the unwanted because we've all been banned or kicked off or, had some sort of issues with the social media platforms and video sharing platforms that don't really want us around. And so we joked about that. From that conversation, it wound up becoming you invited like 30 people. We had like a huge Zoom party with Ben Swan and those conspiracy guys and Conspiracy Farm and Luke Rudowski and Jason Burmis and all kinds of guys. I mean, it was a pretty impressive group of alternative media just talking about censorship. And we've done this now a couple times. Groups haven't been as big as the 30-person, but I think the last one we did, there was like 9 of us, which is a fairly good. Everybody can speak, everybody can get their, make their points and things like that. But it has turned into something that people are actively looking for and asking about, which I thought is kind of nice. The point of it all, I mean, we didn't set out to do it, but the point is, let's have conversations. Let's talk about these things that are important. And thankfully, the people are into it.
Yeah, I think people really like the idea of just bringing people together and just sharing ideas and sharing, because the thing is, if I'm with a guest and the guest and I agree on something or agree on everything, it's going to be a little bit boring of a conversation, or it's just going to sound like none of the ideas are being challenged. And when you have that many people, there might be somebody who has like a slightly different perspective. Maybe they have they have a different source for where they get their information on that specific topic. So they might have just a different outlook on it or some information that we don't have. And it's awesome. And honestly, like, one thing I love about the podcast community, and I've said this a lot, is how awesome everybody is and how nice everybody is for the most part, at least my experience. I mean, maybe there's some people out there listening who are podcasters who have had some negative experiences, but I've had nothing but positive experiences, and I love hanging out with you guys. I love talking to you guys. So in a way, it's almost like a selfish way of like, let me trick these guys and doing a swap cast. And when really I'm just like, hey guys, I just want to hang out. But if I just say that, you won't show up. So if
but I would show up because I feel the same way, because it's like, to have, there's only certain people in my life I can have these conversations with. I mean, there are some people that are really just, in my life that are just very mainstream, and if I'm talking about something that deviates from the mainstream narrative, even by a little bit, that is unwelcomed. And so to be able to get around other people where, I don't have to catch everybody up on the backstory. I don't have to go explain to you, or you don't have to explain to me, that there are, that the media is evil and that the people running governments are corrupted and that this red, blue, left, right paradigm is just dog shit. It's just, they're all working for the same team. If I have this conversation with somebody new, I have to sort of catch them up all the way up to this, to where I currently am. And that, frankly, it takes a while. I mean, I'm willing to do it if somebody is interested to hear it, but like, to have these sort of advanced conversations about, okay, we understand what the situation is. I mean, we understand that we've got governments working against us, social media working against us. There are a lot of people that have a vested interest in shutting the alternative media up, and we've seen them do this. How do we get around that? How do we bringing in guys like you brought in Ernest Hancock, who can talk about hardcore technical aspects of that, and same with Midnight Mike. They can discuss this. Those are things where I just throw my hands up and go, if you say so, man, because I don't know that world. I don't know the hardcore technical components behind how all this can work and how we can move away. But somebody in our group does, and that's the nice thing, is that you put enough people together, get them thinking, and they'll come up with some solutions. And what you talked to Ben recently, you say he's launching his new platform? Has that launched yet? Or
I haven't had him on yet. I think he's going to be on. I'd have to check my schedule, but I believe it's next week or the following week. He's going to be on, and he did just launch. It's called ISE.media, and it's going to be a platform where people can. I mean, basically, it sounds like you can do a little bit of everything. You can put documentaries on there. You can put podcasts on there. You can put videos on there. It can kind of be like a social media site like Facebook and connect with people. So it's going to be like a little bit of everything. It's just going to be a spot where you can just put all types of alternative media stuff. And I love the idea. It still seems like I need him to explain it to further understand what exactly it is. But I guess like it's the first steps of like, okay, well, let's just create a alternative, a spot. And then once we have this spot established, then we'll grow it and see what it blossoms to. But we need that spot where it's uncensored. I mean, even Parlay or Parler, however accounts who you're asking. But that Twitter alternative is really, it's a beautiful app. It looks good. It works very similar to Twitter, but still different enough where they probably can't get sued. And right. And a lot of people are going over there. And then you saw with the Spotify deal with Rogan, we talked about it on our Union, the Unwanted podcast, where everybody's kind of excited about it, not because we really care, that much about Rogan getting richer than he already is, but it's more about like the fact that it emphasizes that somebody with that much influence might possibly also be sick of the censorship. And somebody like him has a lot of pull in what happens in the world and a lot of influence in what happens in the world. So if he goes to Spotify and they become a alternative, then it might force YouTube to be a little bit less strict and censor as much, because people can say, well, screw you, I'm going over here. So the more alternatives there are, the better. I know Midnight Mike's always working on stuff. I mean, we get text messages all the time about like shit, and I'm sure you're a lot like me, where half the time you're just pretending you know what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's some hardcore. He's like, I've opened up this server and I've done this, yeah. And I'm like, sounds great. I mean, exactly. I'm excited for it, but I just don't understand it. I don't have that hardcore background like he has. He's a full-blown programmer. He's a graphic designer, an artist. He's got all those skills are skills that I do not possess, so it's great to have somebody like that who also is, has been doing, they've done with the current lineup, but with of OBDM, they've been doing that shows for 7 years. And then there was a lineup before that with Mike. So, I mean, he's been doing this for a decade. And it's nice to see. It's nice. We mentioned Rogan. Let's talk about this. I mean, in the last week, he announced that he's now moving to Texas. Now, I can envision this is a genius move on his part, because and I don't know that everybody can do it. I don't know that every comedian with a podcast in LA, the Tim Dillons and Sam and all these guys that have, I don't know that they can necessarily afford to be that far away from the cultural hub of comedy, which is Hollywood. But when you're Rogan, you've got $100 million deal. You're going to lose 13% of that right off the bat in taxes in California. You're going to pay zero in state taxes in Texas. That amount right there is enough money that he's saving that would allow him to buy a huge house on a gigantic piece of land, build his own podcast studio, which he could write off, fill it with a bunch of, do a bigger version of what he's currently got, which is like a man cave gym / hangout / podcast studio. You could build that in Texas. And you know what? When you're that big of a guy, when you're that big of a star, people will find you, man. Everyone wants to be on the number one show. You think people are, it's convenient. He's in LA and he can pull all these guys in and everybody sort of rotates through LA if they're promoting a book or a movie or whatever. But look, man, people make an extra trip to wherever Texas he moves, which I'm assuming it's he didn't go into detail, but I mean, he'd be crazy if he wasn't living just someplace outside of Austin.
Yeah,
because I lived in Austin for a while, and it's like it's like Diet Texas. I mean, it's Texas, but it's not Texas. It's kind of it's kind of like halfway point. And it's a beautiful place out there.
That is a spot that he's talked about a lot. How it's a it's one of those places that it's a gem of a spot. It was a secret probably until he mentioned it, and a lot of people started. I mean, that's how these little spots work out. It's like people find out like, hey, there's this cool little spot over here, and then they start telling people. Next thing you know, everybody's going there, and it's like, hey, hold your horses. Now it's overpopulated. Let's find a new next spot.
Well, they didn't do themselves any favor by Austin having their theme being "Keep Austin Weird." So when you do that, then everyone that's kind of weird is like, hey, let's go check this place out. I love Austin. I think it's great, and like I said, I lived there for about 3 months, but I think it'll be an interesting sign to the podcasting world where Rogan's got this new deal. He's got this, what it was announced as $100 million plus. Nobody, I don't think, really knows the details, but look, he was making a fortune before this. He was probably, I mean, based on, the calculations of how ad revenues work, based on views. And I know it's a bit of a murky thing, but he was making $30+ million a year before that. So, I mean, he was still doing well, but I agree. It's really nice that it's kind of like a fuck you to YouTube, who frankly need it, and I don't know that YouTube cares at this point, because when Rogan is like, number one podcast. But then when you look in terms of like YouTube views and things like that and subscriber count, I don't even think he's in the top 100. I mean, there's people that are far bigger than him for that. So I don't know that they mind him going from a revenue standpoint, but it's symbolic. The number one guy just basically packed up and said, I'm tired of this. You guys gave me a hard time. I can't do my stuff live anymore. You start demonetizing. You start telling him which doctors he could have on during this plan. I mean, get the fuck, Susan Wojcicki, get the fuck out of here with this. How dare you, come in and start telling these content creators that this is an approved message? Oh, you got to use the guy that's approved by the CDC. Really? Why? What is this? Is this state sponsored television now, where we can only have one? I mean, it's crazy. So I'm glad that he left. Is leaving. I'm glad that, that opens the door, man. That opens the door for Spotify to maybe go start to accumulate some of these other podcasts, and maybe Ripple Effect will find a nice home on Spotify. I mean, seriously though, because if that's what they're doing, if that's what they're looking for content with followers that are interesting, and if their pitch is we're not gonna tell you what you can and can't do, oh man, everyone will be lining up for that.
Yeah, and I'd be way cheaper than Rogan.
I would be too, man. They could have me for a real discount compared to him. Yeah.
But he seemed like he was really upset about the whole vitamin D thing and pulling some of the censorship around, nutrition and vitamins, because that's something he's really into. That's something I'm really into, so it's really bothersome when you see that. Pretty sound advice that I think it's logical advice, like, hey, vitamin D, zinc, like these things are good for you. It can, we've all kind of acknowledged that it can help your immune system. So why, if I'm talking about it helping your immune system, that's okay. But if I talk about it helping your immune system in regards to coronavirus, all of a sudden that's bad, and that's censored and false information. And, we've talked about this a bunch of times where literally, like, we have story after story after story of misleading articles, reports, videos, reporters just lying on screen about certain things, or misleading watchers on mainstream media, and they never get fact checked. They never get pulled. They never get censored. But you put everybody else to these higher standards, which drive me nuts. I mean, with the pandemic documentary, again, I've said this over and over again on my show. It's like it was so bothersome when people were just like nitpicking every little thing. And I'm like, that's great. I'm like, we can nitpick things. I mean, in general, I think Dr. Judy was right. I think she heard the points she was making were valid and important. And if we want to nitpick every single thing, like, we could get, I mean, CNN should be pulled off TV. I mean, they're constant. Yeah. I mean, you want to talk about obviously having an agenda. I mean, they're just bashing the to president. I'm not one of those Trump supporters. It's funny because Dennis McKenna has been getting so much heat since my last podcast.
I watched the video. People are like, what is he doing? Why does he like Biden so much? What's the matter, man? Did he do too many mushrooms? You know,
I think he's just one of those classic hippie. Like he's just one of those classic hippie liberals. Grew up during like the civil rights era, the hippie movement, Woodstock, and I honestly think he's been so deep into plant medicines and maybe because the first time he was on my show, we actually talked a lot about Big Pharma and plant medicines and the problem, the Flex report. I believe we talked about the Flex report, all these things of how homeopathic medicines kind of transition and how, the AMA basically changed like the whole way we looked at medicine and how it's like you could only get approved if you were selling chemicals, right. So, and we talked about that, and he seems like, everybody loved him, never got any negative feedback. But once we start, and again, I don't know if he's really that deep into politics. Because I pushed back a little bit and I was trying to be polite, but yet kind of tell him hey, it's kind of an illusion. It seems like you're kind of, speaking of hallucinating, I think you're, right. Which is funny because I named that episode the reality hallucination, which because it was a term that he said during the show and I really liked it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, but then after I named it and I posted it, I'm like, you know what? People are going to think I'm referring to him, that he's and so in the, I almost second guessed pulling it or changing the title of it. But I don't think that it's almost like, for example, I think we could knock down his walls because he seems like a logical, nice, polite person where you could get through to him. And I think even when I pushed back, he was always super polite. When I talked about Obama and drone attacks and all this stuff, he didn't really push back that much. I just think it's not something he follows that much. He's really
fine.
And that's okay. Yeah,
that's fine. No, I don't need him. I don't need Dennis McKenna to be an expert on Syria's foreign policy. I need Dennis McKenna to be an expert on plant medicine to explain to me how all this stuff works. But what threw me for a little bit of a loop, I think a lot of people that were watching that was, how can you be the first things that fall away when you do mushrooms and DMT and ayahuasca and peyote and all these things? There's first things that fall away are these fake institutional structures that have been created, like organized religion and organized politics. They just seem to fall away to me. And I don't know anybody that has done the amount of, I don't know anybody that is beyond I did mushrooms one time at a Grateful Dead concert. I mean, somebody that's done them a dozen times or more or whatever. I don't know anybody in that category that is enthusiastic about organized religion or government. And so it was a little surprising to me to hear him be so into that, to have not seen through all that,
but he's it's funny you say that because I had the exact same feeling where I'm we're talking, I think last time he was on, it was on a 2-hour conversation. We talked about the ability to knock down walls and just make you rethink reality and make you rethink everything. And yet this one thing, he's still, I don't know if he just hasn't tripped and done mushrooms and thought about politics. Maybe he's thinking about the bigger questions, what's this all about? What, is there a higher being? Maybe those things. But to me, you would think that having those many, that many experiences, out of body experiences, tripping or whatever it may be, for using these plant medicines as, therapy, you could not be tricked into that whole left-right paradigm. And so to me, it was just, it really was surprising how, and I can understand if he's okay, I don't like Trump. I mean, Trump's obviously very easy not to like, and I can see it. But when he started saying the Joe Biden stuff, that's when I'm oh God.
It wasn't a passive endorsement of Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden's a compassionate guy. He's a good guy. He's a guy that's going to recognize. And I was just oh my God.
Took so
am
much
I watching
strength.
The right interview?
It took so much strength not to immediately cut him off and just be want me to just send you some creepy Joe Biden videos? Right. I'm like, passionate. I'm like, yeah, he's compassionate as long as they're toddlers. Right. I'm like, yeah, it's like, what are you talking about? It's just, but again, I just don't think he really takes that much. And that's the thing. And that's why like the things like the Union of the Unwanted is necessary. And I think a great thing that hopefully will keep growing. And I think people are going to look forward to those shows as much as we do, because you're going to get all these different takes. I mean, I saw Midnight Mike. I mean, he was on that Woke Society's show, and he's really big into Q or whatever. And I think most of us, at least in the Union of the Unwanted founding members, we probably aren't as sold as some of these other YouTubers, to say the least. And but you could have a civil conversation, and you can, and there, it's not to say that something good can't come out of it. Sure. So if Q was your red pill, and then it led you to further understand American history, further understand geopolitics, further understand all these other things, then yeah, I mean, who am I to say? Good. My only concern is like, don't let it become like dogma. Don't let it become. Don't join that tribe where like now Q can do no wrong, and you're stuck in that type of mindset thinking. So it's just, yeah. I mean, it's when I have guests on, I like having people on who I don't. I mean, I had people on, or people contact me about this Scott Horton interview I did during the whole COVID lockdown, and I had him on, and I kind of knew where he stood, like that he was a little bit on the, I think this is kind of a serious thing, but I was kind of interested where that discussion would go. And honestly, I was getting so many people contacting me saying like, and it wasn't fans of the show, because they loved what I was doing in regards to having people on that were stating the same things I was stating and had the same perspective. But I had friends of mine, people I went to school with, people that knew me somewhat personally, saying, that disagree with me, and would say, well, how come you only have people on that agree with you? Why don't you have somebody on who disagrees with you or whatever? So, and then I'm like, Scott Horn's perfect, because he's really good at being able to have a civil discussion. And most of the guests I've had on have been like that, where if you push back a little bit, as long as everybody's respectful and nobody's trying to make somebody look dumb or whatnot, you can have a real logical, fun discussion where you push back a little bit. And I want to be pushed back, because honestly, that's when I learn. Like, there's so many times where I'm like, okay, this is where I stand on this specific thing. And then I have a discussion with somebody and they push back, and I'm like, holy shit, I don't have a response. And if I don't have a response, maybe it's because I haven't thought this out, or maybe I haven't looked into it enough. So I have to rethink where I stand on this. And so you need that. It's like the Unabomber, right? You put yourself in a cabin, or you isolate yourself, if you're in prison and they throw you in isolation, you can convince yourself of anything, because you don't have, you're not bouncing your ideas off anybody. So you can slowly convince yourself of absolutely anything, because we're very good at just justifying our way of thinking, our actions, all that stuff. So when you're talking to other people, when they push back, it just plants a little seed of doubt where like, okay, maybe I have this thing wrong. Maybe I have it wrong. Let me rethink it. Let me do some more research, or let me extract your information and your perspective to help mold mine. And I think that's so important. That's why I love these conversations. I so much of the world is divided by these ridiculous things, this left-right thing, or race thing, pro-cop, anti-cop, all this stuff, defund the cops, which is just silly. But so much of this separates us, and people just don't want to even talk about any of these topics because they're so afraid of it turning into a real aggressive, argument, and not a debate, not like a civil debate, but a aggressive argument. And we need to learn to do that. I mean, I say it all the time on my show. It's completely acceptable to argue about sports. But yet, if you talk about what's going on in the world, if you talk about vaccines, you talk about geopolitics, you talk about any type of politics, it sparks an argument. People look at you like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you should have known better. But yet, if we argue about sports, nobody ever says, hey, you shouldn't have brought up sports. It's like, no. And I'm like, well, why can we argue about sports, which isn't important? It has no effect on our lives, no serious effect on most of our lives. It doesn't. To me, it seems like a really clever way of indirectly getting us to expand our thinking and just be tribal and divide and conquer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, listen, after I watched your Dennis McKenna interview, I'm voting for Biden now. So, that is a joke. I am not. But I'll tell you what, in my Octopus book, one of the people I quoted the most was his brother Terrence, and I'll tell you, what an interesting, fascinating guy. For those of you that want to listen to, I think it's like a 10-minute video clip. Go on YouTube or wherever and look for something that says Terrence McKenna explains smoking DMT at the height of an acid trip. And you will find him tell a story of when he was in college, and it is so hysterical. So I love these interesting, quirky guys. I'd love to have Dennis McKenna on and talk to him. I wouldn't probably talk to him too much about politics, obviously, but I have other areas that I'd like to get into because, I want to know. I know a little bit about a lot, but I want to know from the guys that have, been deep into it for decades. And these, a guy like him, perfect person to come in and explain to you about, the chemical structure and all these things. And that's what I want from him.
I'll get you his contact information. I mean,
cool.
He's such a nice dude. Like he really is. And I almost feel bad the fact that he's getting such backlash. I knew when the interview was happening that this is not going to go well because I'm like so many, and it's out of respect for my listeners because I know that they're open-minded people who see past the illusion. So when I'm talking to somebody like that, I knew that like, okay, a lot of the people who are like myself, they're going to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But he's such a nice, and the thing is too, is like, it sucks because the first time he was on the show, we talked about a lot of stuff that I think a lot of people on my show would have really appreciated, because I think since the first time he was on, which was years ago, I have a lot of new listeners, I hope. And those new listeners probably didn't go back and listen to that episode. And if they did, he brings a lot to the table in regards to fighting back against Big Pharma, understanding how plant medicines and functional medicine and homeopathic medicine has a lot of benefits, and you're actually resolving the issue instead of just symptom management like a lot of stuff now. And so he was in a great documentary called Neurons to Nirvana, which was on Netflix at the time when I had him on. That's a really good documentary. And he was in DMT, the spirit molecule. Oh, yeah. He was in that too. And they're both, I highly recommend watching both. So he does bring a lot of useful information, and he is like I said, he's somebody that can bring a lot of knowledge and information that I think a lot of people in the alternative media world can benefit from, because he is into alternative medicine and a lot of this stuff that's being suppressed. I just think I fucked up by asking. Well, I didn't realize how political it was going to be right off the bat,
right?
And that he's going to go down that road that quickly. But I was, eventually I think we worked our way out of it and talked about some other stuff. But I think it was a great example too of like some of the problems we're having today, where like I can have somebody on like Dennis McKenna, and even somebody like him, which there's a billion things I could talk to him about. They're so divided in regards to political agendas, and they've been tricked into this political thing that even he seems like, hey, like you have to shake him and be like, hey, you've been tricked, dude, like snap out of it, like
maybe that's how he gets around the whole thing, because you had Dell Bigtree on, and then you said, and Dell, we know Dell. I mean, he's very logical, intelligent, has the background, speaks about the vaccine situation in such a clear and logical and rational way. And like you said, when you had him on, you watched your numbers just fall off a cliff. It had to have been suppressed, right? It had to have been shadow banned because of that. So it's funny, like maybe Dennis McKenna knows, he's like, hey, as long as I throw the Joe Biden thing in there, they let me do my, they let me, they don't censor my work. But if you go full Dell Bigtree, then there's repercussions for you having him on. Not just forget Dell. I mean, obviously Dell gets shadow banned wherever he goes, but like didn't you say it had like 6 months of lasting repercussions for you?
Yeah, well, immediately it wouldn't play. It was the first time I think it was the first time that iTunes episode just wouldn't play. And so people just kept contacting me. Hey, it's not working on iTunes. It's not working on iTunes. And I got some like BS excuse on what was going on. I'm like, well, that's funny because I know the Grimerica guys had him on, had similar issues. I mean, you look at the debate he did with our good friend Jeffrey Wilson and Pat Miletich. When he did that debate with, I think it was Pat's friend George, it was a great debate because they're civil. George has like really understands science and research, and it was a great debate. They had issues with that, like it was suppressed. It was either I think it was a similar issue where it wasn't played on iTunes or some platforms. I know Facebook like pulled it or whatever, and so it's this reoccurring theme that it's like, and you look at the Google whistleblower. I mean, I had him on, Zach Voorhees, and he talked about it. That was one of the things that really opened his eyes initially, was how they were suppressing any type of alternative medicine, any other alternative perspectives to vaccines. And that's when he really like planted the seed of like, okay, what the hell's going on here? And then I have example after example. I mean, Vax, Dell Bigtree's documentary was supposed to, I saw him at the Red Pill Expo in Hartford last year. And he was saying how he told a story there where, I believe he told it there, and where he said that they had a like lifelong like contract with Amazon Prime. The Vax documentary was going to be free on Amazon Prime forever. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, we're pulling it. And they just pulled it. And they just completely pulled it. And same thing with this documentary called The Big Secret. Dr. Susan, I forget her name, but it was her and this other filmmaker did this great documentary on the history of medicine. They go into the Flexer Report. They go into the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. They go into like really the history of how they changed medicine and their influence on it. And all of a sudden pulled off Amazon Prime. And there's example. I mean, I don't know if Brzezinski is still on. I had Dr. Brzezinski on like years ago, and Eric Marola, who's a filmmaker. But there's just so many examples of obviously the pandemic documentary. I mean, that just disappeared. You couldn't get that anywhere, which was crazy because the pandemic documentary, even their actual website, which you think like, I have rights to this. I pay for this domain name. How can anybody hack this and get into this? That just disappeared. You couldn't even watch it there. Her Wikipedia page, the Dr. Judy, I'm not going to say her last name because I always mess it up, but Dr. Judy, her Wikipedia page was locked where nobody could do anything to it. She was called a conspiracy theorist, anti-vaxxer, and then they locked it so nobody could do anything to it. So anybody who looked her up, that's the first line they're going to see. And there's all these debunking things coming up and all these debunking YouTube videos. So you could watch the whole documentary if somebody was giving their opinion during the documentary, but it was too dangerous to watch without somebody forcing their opinion on you. Like it was ridiculous. I'm like, so it's not too dangerous to watch. It's just too dangerous to watch if you let me come up with my own conclusion, which is what really, really bothers me. I'm the same way like Dell Bigtree. I mean, first of all, the Vax documentary, for people who think it's an anti-vax documentary, it's not. It's actually about a cover-up. Dr. William Thompson, who worked for the CDC, was the author of a study. It was a study that they were looking at kids who got the MMR vaccine within, like, I think the first 12 months of their life, 12 to something months, around that time, and then kids who got the MMR vaccine later in life, I believe like after there were 3. And they saw an increase in the chance of getting autistic symptoms and autism with those kids who got the MMR vaccine within the first year of their life. And that study it was basically suppressed from the public. And then you had this Dr. Hooker who had a vaccine injured child, and he was a scientist. It's really understood, how to read the studies and understand the research. He contacted CDC, said, hey, by any chance, do you have any studies that talking about the safety of vaccines and whatnot? And they hooked him up with Dr. William Thompson. Unknowingly to William Thompson, Dr. Thompson that Dr. Hooker started recording the phone calls and getting copies of all this paperwork or whatnot, and then eventually released it to the public. That and the crazy thing is that Dr. William Thompson, he talked about feeling guilty. How every time he saw an autistic child, he felt guilty because he knew that this research has been suppressed, and this research was supposed to be, I forget like how long of a study it was supposed to be, but it extended to like 4 years. I think it was supposed to be like 6-month study or a 1-year study or whatever it was, but it took 4 years because they kept trying to manipulate the numbers. They were changing, like taking out certain kids or picking certain ages or whatever to see if they could kind of manipulate the study to prove that there wasn't a link there. And so this stuff happens. The crazy thing is like all the vaccines are created by 4 companies, and they all have been sued for billions and billions of dollars. None of them are morals. So when you talk about vaccines, it's not like all of a sudden like, hey, we know Big Pharma is not moral, but they hired all the moral people and put them in the vaccine division. Right. It's like, so, we put all the good people there, they're all, Boy Scouts and really, really awesome people. And it's like, no, they care about money. They care about, you even see some of them, some of the reps that they hire, it's always attractive women. I know some girls who I went to school with that know jack shit about health and medicine. And all of a sudden I'm like, I see them on Facebook. I'm like, wait, you work for who? You're a rep for what pharmaceutical company? And I'm like, you did not get hired because of your brains, I don't think, because I'm like, I'm pretty sure you weren't really one of those people who are really, you didn't go to school for anything like that. You weren't into health and fitness or whatnot. So and they've talked about it. There's been plenty of documentaries where they've talked about how they purposely hire attractive reps for their businesses. But they've been, the vaccine courts. You look at, in the 80s, the amount of vaccines that you'd get are very little. Now you get like 72 vaccines, like 72 doses of like, I think I have it here. It's like 72 doses of, I forget how many vaccines, but it's quite a bit. And it increased quite a bit after they created the vaccine court, because now nobody is responsible for it, and in theory, I kind of understand the lie, like it's like, okay, if you're a typical person, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like vaccines, people can't get sued. If the companies get sued, they're going to be less likely of investing in vaccines that could save lives or whatever. So in theory, it sounds great until you find out like, okay, well now like you can't sue a vaccine company. The amount of vaccines go skyrocketing because they're not responsible for it. If you go to a vaccine court, which has given out money to families, that's the other thing, and
$4.2 billion. They've given out more money. They paid out more money than the Catholic Church has for settling rape cases. And people know that the Catholic Church is dirty. They know that. And they know that they've paid out a fortune. Just what they don't realize is that Big Pharma has paid out even more for vaccines. It's interesting. You mentioned your friend who's a pharma rep and, attractive, but maybe not, head of the class or anything. We in the United States see vaccine ads on TV. We're one of only 2 countries, New Zealand being the other, that allows that. But you also see it, and you've seen it forever, in magazines, People magazine. They have to buy 2 pages or 3 pages to put all the side effects on the back of one, and all these ads, all that money that they spend. And it's billions of dollars to reach us. They spend 7 times more marketing directly to doctors. So to put that in perspective, and we know they spend billions. So they spend billions. And the reason why is that for every dollar they spend, to make vaccines, they put $3.40 in their own pocket. So there's a really good, it's a big moneymaker. When there's no legal downside, when you cannot be sued for your product. I put this in my Octopus book about that 72, mandatory injections. If I made it law that everybody had to buy 72 copies of my book, how good would my book really be? Like, what incentive would I have? It'd just be like dick jokes. It'd be 250 pages of dick jokes. And at the end, I'd just write sucker, for everybody that had to buy it. I'd have no incentive if it's mandated. So this is the problem with the vaccine industry too, is that they have no incentive to improve the quality of it because there's no downside to them. They can't get sued. Yeah, it goes into a VAERS court, which paid out $4.2 billion, but that's not even Big Pharma's money. That's your money as a consumer. Yep. You spend 75 cents from every one of those shots that you get your kids. 75 cents goes into that pool. And then that pool of money is used to pay off all the sick and damaged kids. And then when they pay them off, they have to sign a NDA, which says that if I talk about the settlement that I got, this court system, this VAERS court, which is a scam run by the Department of Health and Human Services and the Justice Department, it's a fucking scam. If I talk about it and break this NDA, they'll come after me for 10 times the amount that I was given. So not only do I have a sick kid, but now I'm going to be living in my car because they're coming after you. So it's a really messed up world. And I think that the vaccine topic, the vaccine debate is one of those things, you hear Hillary Clinton say, the science is settled, vaccines work. That's what she said. Exactly those words. And it's like, no. Whenever somebody is saying that the vaccine is settled, that the science is settled, then that it's no longer science. Then it becomes dogma. There's more to it than this. And if people are unsure about like the effects of this, do some research. I mean, Dell Bigtree is a smart guy. He has zero incentive to. I mean, he made a movie about vaxxed and everything. He couldn't have been making any money from that because the amount of additional
sort of hard to make money off anyways. I mean, the people will tell you, never mind when it's a super suppressed documentary.
They threw them out of the continent of Australia. They told them, you guys all have to leave or we're going to put you in jail. So I saw Vaxxed in the movie theaters in Denver. And what's funny is that you never see a mobile news truck in front of a movie theater get people's opinion when they come out. But you did that day because I came out and the news was up there, was set up. And there were only about maybe 30 of us in the movie theater. And it was an obscure one. It certainly wasn't like a Cineplex with 24 screens and you get Vaxxed as one. It was like an obscure old timey movie theater. And because that's the only place where you could play. I mean, hey, they're lucky they even got to run it because when David Icke comes to town, they'll pull it like an hour before his movie's supposed to play in LA. They did that to him last year. And so, I think you have to ask yourself whether it be vaccines or whether it be this coronavirus situation or whatever. If the government/media is in such a huge hurry to silence you talking about it, what does that say? Does that tell you by default, oh, they must care about us and don't want this misinformation? Because if that's your default, you're really missing it. Because I feel like when the government, everyone is trying to suppress a topic, to me, it has, of course, the Streisand effect where I'm like, well, let's see what the fuss is all about with this. Let's see. Oh, you're trying to silence vaccines? Gee, I wonder why you're trying to silence vaccines. I wonder if this has anything to do with the relationship between Big Pharma and the media. And of course, we know that it does. So it's fascinating to me that this while extremely frustrating, the censorship, the deplatforming, all this, I also take it as a compliment. That I also see it as a sign that the alternative media is in the right direction. Because if we were talking about things that they, didn't really worry about, then, they'd let us do our own thing. The fact that we're talking about these important issues, they legitimately panic about that. They don't want these conversations to be had, which is exactly why we got to have them, right?
Yeah. Well, the VAERS system. So the VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, and it's if you have any type of side effects, you're supposed to report it. And they create this system where they're supposed to kind of keep up with all the vaccine, injuries or any side effects. And they've done studies and they've written reports about how like 1% of that stuff's reported. Because the truth is, if my kids aren't vaccinated, but if I'm just a typical person who listens to my pediatrician, I vaccinate my child. if he gets a little red or he gets a high fever, somebody might call the pediatrician like, hey, and they're like, oh, they'll go away, and don't worry about it. And then that's it. Like nobody's reporting it. So how many people are actually having side effects? And how many people are having side effects that they're just not even linking to the vaccine because the pediatrician tells you that the science is settled and don't worry about it. But the science isn't settled. So there's this organization called Informed. What was it? It's Informed Consent Action Network, and they actually filed a Freedom of Information Act to have the CDC release any science paperwork studies that prove that the DTaP vaccine doesn't cause autism. And in federal court, the CDC said, and this is stories, there's tons of stories like this, impossible to find. I mean, I remember looking for it today because I'm like, oh, maybe I'll bring that up. Couldn't fucking find it. It took me a little bit of research to find it. They actually said in court that they have no evidence that vaccines don't cause autism. So you can make the argument that if you believe that there's no evidence that vaccines cause autism, there's equally as much evidence that it doesn't cause autism. So when you start seeing the numbers of vaccines go up, and so in 1960, there's 5 doses, 1983, 24 doses, 2016, 69, and now in 2020, I believe it's 72. All vaccines you have to get before or up till 18 to go to school legally or whatnot. I mean, my kids, I use the religious exemption because our religion is that we're anti-vax.
Right. But that'll go away at some point.
I know, and I had this group, the CT Freedom Alliance, that's actually what they're doing in Connecticut. Is that it's a nonprofit organization with actually the founders are people who have autistic children who are injured by vaccines, and one of them's an attorney, the other one's a veteran, and they're really passionate about this, and they're just fighting for their right to still have those exemptions if they want. I mean, the thing is, the reason why anytime I have an opportunity to let people know my kids aren't vaccinated is because too many people don't say it out loud. So what happens is that you think you're on an island by yourself. We're like, well, if I don't vaccinate my kids, what the fuck? I'm putting them in danger. Like the pediatricians tell me like it's unsafe and he could get this, he could die from that. And it's so people need to hear these stories of people to like, hey, look at my kids. My kids are, 5. My daughter's turning 4 in a couple weeks. They're healthy. Cognitively, they're advanced. They're never sick. They're active. They're full of energy. Great personalities. Like, look, it's not scary, But if I listen to my pediatrician, like every time we had a checkup from when my kids were born, till they finally gave up on us, and eventually got kicked out of the pediatrician's office. But
right,
which is a true story. We actually do have a new pediatrician just recently because we got a letter in the mail saying we were not welcome back. But
because you're cutting into their 63% vaccination rate. When you're at 63% or higher as an office, the Big Pharma bonuses you $400 for each one of your patients that's complying. So there's a financial incentive there for the doctors. It puts you in a gray area where you're financially incentivizing medical treatments and things like that for doctors, and it creates the potential, maybe not for all of them, but it creates the potential for them to push to make sure that they get you up. Why does every time people go into their doctors like, how are we doing on your flu shots? You were ready for the flu shot? Because they're incentive. Not only do they make money from them, but they're also incentivized that if they have their herd, their own personal herd at 63% or more, they get money. That's not to say that all doctors do it for the money. A lot of them probably think that they're actually helping, but who the fuck are you helping with a flu shot that's like less than 10% effective with all the downsides that come with it? Why? That's a person I want to play poker against every chance I get. Anybody that thinks like that, because they are bad at math. They are bad at statistics. Why you would take on that additional risk for a couple percent of protection against the flu? You think, by the way, Ricky, we're going to fix everything with Corona. We're going to fix it when the vaccine comes. That vaccine that's so fucking effective against the common cold and the flu, right? That doesn't work at all. But don't worry, once it's there, everything will go back to normal.
Well, the thing is, like, even the flu shot, I mean, you've seen anywhere from like 30% effective to 40% effective. And you've seen studies like the Pentagon study showing that people who got the flu vaccine actually had a higher rate of getting a better chance of getting the coronavirus. You have Dr. Fauci saying this, how like sometimes vaccines, he said it during a press conference, sometimes vaccines can have a negative effect in regards to like having a negative effect on your immune system or your ability. There's actual term for it, I guess, what it does to you, where you're actually more likely to get the disease or another disease, you know. Right. And so this is, and there's an actual scientific term for it. I'm just an idiot, so you're gonna have to look it up yourself. But okay. And the same thing with even Dr. Hortez. There's a press or a video of him testifying or in front of Congress or somebody talking about how this can happen. So they understand like coronavirus vaccines don't work. They're very dangerous. We know this. Vaccines, and not just that, you know, the whole science is settled thing is the most unscientific thing you can say. The bottom line is, if I gave every kid in the world peanut butter, a bunch are gonna die. It doesn't mean that peanut butter is necessarily the most dangerous thing known to man. Doesn't mean, but it also doesn't mean I'm anti-peanut butter if I say, hey, we shouldn't do that. Hey, we shouldn't give every single kid in the world peanut butter. Then I'm not, you know, nobody calls me anti-peanut butter, you know, right. But yet I've said this a bunch of times. I'm like, so if we agree that if you give the same thing to everybody, some people are going to have different reactions. Some people might have a positive reaction, have no reaction, but they're definitely going to be people who are going to have negative reactions. Why should you mandate anybody to have those things? You're putting your child at risk. Now, you can make the argument that you're putting your child at risk by not getting the vaccine, but because there's never been a double-blind placebo study, you know, the safety, I mean, the research behind vaccines, it's so flimsy and so shitty that it's like, okay, well, let me just take the risk of giving them, you know, good nutrition, exercise, sunlight, make their bodies as strong as possible. So that way, when they do have an issue, you know, they do get sick, they're equipped to fight against that. I was at the gym the other day and they're like, oh, 16-year-old child or it was like a 16 and a 14-year-old, like sister died and then the son died soon after or vice versa. And I'm seeing the mother cry and like, you know, as a parent, it hits home and you feel bad. And then they showed pictures of the kids and they were ginormous. And I'm just like, and I don't want to jump to conclusions, but those kids didn't look that healthy. And you know, same thing with like the flu. I mean, the flu kills people. And so if you're not taking care of your body, it's not just the coronavirus you should be concerned about. You should be worried about diabetes. You should be worried about cancer because cancer cells use glucose as an energy source. You should be worried about heart disease. I mean, tons of different things that come with eating processed foods. I mean, there's that article. I think it was a Times article. Sugar is toxic. There's a great documentary called Sugar Coated. If you want to hear the history of the science of sugar, the first time Gary Taubes was on the Joe Rogan podcast, he really went through the history of it and how he was, you know, just somebody, a journalist, investigative journalist who wrote about science and whatnot. And then somebody's like, hey, if you want to do some investigating research on some really flimsy science, go into the nutrition and health. Because he's like, guess what? That's all based on bullshit. So he looks into it and finds out like, holy crap, like all these people were telling us that sugar's okay and all this stuff. And then all the research that was suppressed. And then the
financed by the sugar industry and everything.
The American Heart Association, the AHA, the American Heart Association. I mean, they literally were funded by, given money by the food industry that was helping push this idea that like sugar is just an empty calorie. Don't worry about it. It doesn't do anything. You get food or a drink or whatever. You look at like daily value of just about everything except sugar, because what they want you to do is look past it. Like, don't worry about. There's no such thing as a daily value. Have as much as you want. Don't worry about it. And then they'll change the name, but call it sucralose or call it whatever. Give it a different name just so, and then you think, oh, this is sugar-free. And then you like, what is it sweetened with? Oh, sucralose. Well, I don't know what the fuck that is, but at least there's no sugar, Right. So it's like they just find a great way to market things to you. And a lot of times the artificial sweeteners are way worse for you. If people are looking for artificial sweeteners organic stevia is good for you. Monk fruit doesn't have any insulin spike on you, won't cause inflammation, won't make you hungry. I fast all, I eat one meal a day. I fast all day, and I do the keto diet. I've been doing it for years. So I know if I have anything like that has an artificial sweetener or have, anything like that, I immediately get hungry and I won't be able to fast all day. And it just has that spike. And I also know that by my joints, the next day, if I have a cheat meal and I drink something, that has some sugar, some sweeteners in it or whatever, the next day my joints are inflamed, everything, I'm in pain or whatnot. This stuff is not good for you. I had Dr. Thomas Seyfried on my show who, he's out of I don't know if it's Boston University. I believe it's Boston University or Boston College. It's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing.
No,
but
it's same.
But I'm trying to think which one he was on. I don't want to offend him because I know they're very tribal with their universities. Right. But either one. He wrote this book called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. But it's about the idea that like we've known for like 100 years that cancer uses glucose as an energy source. So if you use something like the ketogenic diet as a therapy to kind of fight, starve cancer cells, possibly even prevent it. So he has like over 150 peer-reviewed studies, and we had a long discussion about this. And he's like, nobody's interested in how to fight cancer with dietary methods. Like there's just no money to be made. Even when I had Dr. Dominic D'Agostino on, I believe when I had him on, he talked about this, about how when they were finding all these benefits of the ketogenic diet, one thing that kind of got brought up, a discussion they had, is like, how do we create a pharmaceutical drug that can give you the same benefits of the ketogenic diet? And it's like everybody's already thinking like, how can I patent something and make money? It's not like, how do I spread this information that can help people and change people's lives and help you cognitively and fight cancer and fight seizures? I don't know if you heard my show I did with Jim Abrams, who did the movies, the Naked Gun movies and Airplane.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jim Abrams, who did those movies, he was on not too long ago, and Naked Gun was like, those were some of my favorite movies growing up. So it was great to have a reason to have him on and talk about the Charlie Foundation, which was named after his son because his son was having these super violent seizures. Put a lot of stress on the family, because think about like the amount of time and effort and energy that the parents need to give this kid as good of a life as possible. You're constantly looking for research, you're looking for medicines, you're looking for therapies, and his son would have like these super violent seizures, and which was could create and probably did create long-term damage also, because you think about having a really violent seizure, if you're having throughout your life hundreds or thousands of those, it's going to cause some damage. And so he had all the best resources, or access to all the best resources, because he was a famous filmmaker, so he knew doctors in high places, he knew people who gave money to hospitals, so he could cut in line, talk to all the greatest minds. And everybody just kept giving him more meds, surgery. His son had a surgery which now looking back, he probably was useless and pointless and didn't help. And so he goes through all this, and he's going through this stress that's causing a lot of friction in the family, because some of the other siblings feel like they're being neglected because this one kid, and which is really, that hit home too, because I could just imagine being the family and thinking like, okay, in a way, I'm mad because we're being neglected, but yet I'm sad because the reason I'm being neglected. It's like it's this tornado of emotions and I'm sure internal dilemmas that's going on. But to make a long story short, because I already made it long, so I'm going to attempt to make it short. He found out that the ketogenic diet was something that John Hopkins found out had a lot of success in getting rid of these violent seizures. And the reason why is because it has something to do with the way your brain processes like glucose or whatever as an energy source. So if you get your body in like ketosis, you can use ketones as an energy source. So like your body's like a hybrid car. It can run off like glucose, it can run off fats. You can run off sugars or fats for energy source. So if your body's having a hard time running off sugars, you get it to run off fats. So they get his kid on the ketogenic diet and completely cures them of these violent seizures. And he's like, I had access to all the best doctors. Not one person recommended this to me. Not one person told me that this research even existed. Wow. And yet, who knows how many years of stress on the family and stress on his son could have been prevented if somebody just recommended it. And he went to doctor. So this is a perfect example of how research that's there. It's a alternative that people would laugh at, like, oh no, if you're not being right, because we assume if a doctor's not recommending it to you, it's because one, it's bullshit, or it's pseudoscience, or it doesn't work, right? And this is his story to me is so important because it's a perfect example of how there was something that worked, there was an alternative that worked, and yet it wasn't even like he was going to see like just a local doctor in some random town or city. He had access to the best doctors and the greatest minds, and could cut in line, and yet nobody recommended this to him. And so he eventually started something called the Charlie Foundation, named it after his son, and looked into research, how ketogenic diet can help with cancer, autism, arthritis, so many different things. And I think it's a great story because it's a perfect example. Because a lot of times, right, if you give somebody health advice or say, hey, you should look into this, you should look into that, people just assume if my doctor didn't recommend it or didn't say that to me or suggest it, then it's probably bullshit. I'm not going to even entertain it. Yeah. But he's a perfect story of how, obviously that's wrong. I mean, and doctors don't agree. That's the other thing too. It's like this idea of like, hey, Dr. Fauci says this, or Dr. Birx says this, or my doctor said that. It's like, you do realize like people get second opinions all the time. Doctors don't agree all the time. So it's like, it's not uncommon. I mean, all they do, just like us in the alternative media world, we look at stuff, we look at information, and then we use our critical thinking skills to come up with a conclusion. We might not all come to the same conclusion. We might all watch the same movie or look at the same painting or listen to the same song and all have a different opinion on what it means. So it's this idea that it's like one size fits all, where it's just like, this doctor says this, it's because all the doctors believe that it's the same thing. And a lot of times, as you know, in the medical field, like, you don't want to be scrutinized as like the crazy doctor who believes in conspiracy theories. So a lot of doctors are afraid of just speaking out and saying something.
Yeah, there's the inverse of that too, is that if it's legal and available, therefore it must have gone through rigorous testing, it must be fine for us, and it must have passed all their strict guidelines and everything. You talk about the sugar industry and the artificial sugar, to be specifically. And we think about aspartame, which is used in a variety of, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of products. I used to drink a lot of Diet Coke. Not a good thing. Loaded with aspartame. Would give me headaches. I quit drinking it 10 years ago. Part of the reason why I quit drinking it was I found out the story of aspartame, and you just assume it's like Clark W. Griswold, who works at the factory, where he makes all sorts of food additives and everything. You're like, oh, well, somebody just figured this out. Well, the story of aspartame is that somebody did develop it, and they kept testing it. And they would give it to all the rats, and half of the rats were getting massive tumors and were dying. And they kept trying to get it approved and approved and approved. And to their credit, at least to a little bit of their credit, the United States government was saying, we're not approving this. This is extremely dangerous. And then they kept lying and faking the science. And the government would catch it and go, not only are we not approving this, we're about to take all of you people and put you in prison for what you're doing. Like, we're about to charge you with this. This is a crime. What you guys are doing, trying to fake the science, is a crime. And it went on and on for a decade. Aspartame, and this was in the 70s. They're trying to get it passed and everything. They couldn't do it because it was killing rats. They finally got it passed. You know how they got it passed? They brought in a new CEO, not a doctor, not a researcher. No. They brought in a new CEO who assured them that he would be able to get it passed. And he did. And you know who that CEO was? Donald fucking Rumsfeld.
That's right.
That's how it got passed.
Yeah.
That's how it got passed. So if you're out there, you're making this assumption, much like I did, drinking a Diet Coke and everything. Oh, it's got aspartame. Hey, it's better than sugar. It's not better than sugar. It was killing rats. The only reason why it's legal is that Rumsfeld got it passed because of his sketchy connections. So there's a lot of that going on. And I think people mistakenly just make the assumption that, well, if it's FDA approved, it must be healthy. No. If the CDC is making it mandatory, it's probably because it's good for you. No. The CDC makes billions of dollars off of vaccine licensing. They have patents. They make money from that. They make most of their money from that. They're a vaccine company. So we're up against we don't have all day long. The normal person out there doesn't have all day long to research these things. You have to make assumptions on some things in life just in order to speed up the process. And so you make the assumption that, hey, listen, it's in Diet Coke. And Diet Coke is sold everywhere. If it was killing people, we'd probably hear about it on our nightly news. Not true. But, and all these assumptions that you make, or FDA approved it. Hey, my kid's getting vaccines. Oh, well, my doctor said I should get it. So I should get it because I don't have time to do the research, but he's a doctor. And so I'm going to assume that he knows it all. These are very dangerous assumptions for us. So we become this country of people that are sort of half researching things, we're like, we've heard of it and we maybe read a little something about it, but we don't know the ins and outs. And then the media and the government get a hold of it, and the marketing companies, and they paint these rosy pictures where it's like side effects may include blah, 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 and they say it really fast and kind of under their breath. But I've said this in a couple podcasts before, like, go look at Chantix, the quit smoking drug medication. Go look at the side effects for that. There's websites that are devoted to Chantix nightmares. It's like where they just go off. People just post their craziest acid trippy, like, Chantix induced nightmares that they have. Like, there's serious problems. I mean, I kind of laugh about it, but it's probably not funny if you're someone trying to quit smoking and you keep getting visited by the devil in the middle of the night, but these people are having really bad side effects to this. But the assumption is, hey, it got through all the approval. So, how bad can it be? Yeah, there's some downsides, but just deal with it. It's science, right? Science, Ricky.
Well, the thing is too, is like what people don't take in consideration is that if the FDA approval, the steps that they have to go through to get it FDA approved, if that was really good and a really well put together process and system, why the fuck is there so many drugs that get FDA approved then pulled because of lawsuits? It happens all the time. You'll be up late at night, you see some attorney commercial like, hey, do you have a loved one who died from this, blah blah blah, or give us a call. It's like, it happens all the time. There's books written about all these drugs that just and I believe there's even a website that shows all the drugs that got FDA approved and then eventually taken off the market. I mean, what does that tell you? It tells you that the FDA approval system was designed so we don't become guinea pigs. Like, hey, try this, see if it's safe, and then if it's not, we'll pull it. Like, that's the whole point of having it. It's so it's only put on the market so for the most part, if it is safe, and yet so many things get pulled. I mean, what was that birth control drug, Yaz or whatever it was? Yeah, that was another one that got pulled. It happens. It happens all the time. And in regards to like studies, Dr. Cirullini, and you're talking about aspartame, Dr. Cirullini from France did a study on GMOs and pesticides. These mice got tumors, and then kind of got a lot of attention because it was like the first study that showed like pesticides linked to cancer and tumors or whatnot. And then all of a sudden it got retracted. They pulled it. And then he fought because he's like, you don't have any justification to pull it because it was peer reviewed, it was published or whatnot. And then eventually he ended up winning, and they end up saying, hey, we pulled it for unjust reasons and whatnot. And nobody followed up with the story. So all is that a GMO pesticide study that proved that it had links to causing cancer was debunked, and then that's it, and then it just goes away. And this type of stuff happens all the time, where it's like, same thing with like Dr. Wakefield. People just be like, oh, and that's the thing. Like, it sucks that nobody looks into his story or what really happened or the details of it, and everybody's like, oh, well, he's a quack. And I'm like, well, do you really know what happened? Do you really know his story? And then everybody just dismisses everything you say, and it's awesome to have people like Robert Kennedy Jr., who just did that debate with Alan Dershowitz, the pedo guy, and
big time pedo.
who apparently was the only person who hung out Epstein and got massaged by an old Russian person.
Right.
But it just coincidentally, right? You're just the only one. Everybody else saw young girls everywhere except you. You got screwed, and you got the old Russian young girl. I mean, older woman.
Oh,
but
so unlucky.
Yeah, but he, the fact that somebody is willing to put his career on the line. He said it because he was a big environmental attorney, was a part of a lot of these cases. I mean, he was a part of you ever watched the movie Dark Waters?
No.
Oh, great film. I had to. So it's based on. There's also a documentary called The Evil We Know or something like that. But it's about this DuPont case. Dark Waters is a phenomenal film with like big name actors and all people you would recognize. And I believe it's you can watch it on Amazon or Amazon Prime or Netflix. But a great story about DuPont, how they were hiding the fact that they were throwing these chemicals in like wastewater and people were getting sick and all this stuff. And so the attorney that was basically the main character in this movie was on my show, and Robert Kennedy was also a part of that lawsuit. It was a huge lawsuit against DuPont, and he's been a part of getting thimerosal out of the mercury preservative out of vaccines, and then he just kept basically, he was an environmental doctor or attorney who at, I guess, gatherings, and people would contact him, and parents would go up to him and say, hey, like my kid, I think there's a link between the vaccine and my child and this and that. And eventually he got kind of, thrown into this whole thing. But it shows you the power of propaganda and the power of the mainstream media and just the power of the pro-vax Big Pharma people, because even somebody who, like, people love his family. Like, I mean, people on the left love the Kennedys. They love Robert Kennedy for, his father, for, during the whole civil rights era, all this stuff. I mean, a lot of people believe that JFK was the last, like, good president we've ever had in the U.S. Like, and yet they still can demonize him. And even somebody who has, the name Robert Kennedy Jr. can be called a quack and be called, because that's the power of Big Pharma. And that's the thing. Like, it's even with the hydroxychloroquine that Trump was taking. Like, when he first mentioned it, I remember telling my wife, I'm like, this drug's going to be demonized. And she's like, why? I'm like, because it's generic. It's super cheap. I'm like, you think they're going to like have this whole hysteria happen and they're not going to profit from it? They're not going to find a way to make incredible amounts of money off it? Of course they are. And so I'm like, they're going to push some new drug. They're going to push some expensive drug. They're going to push some a new vaccine, and they're going to demonize it. But when Trump actually, and I give him a little bit of credit for actually admitting that he was taking it, I'm like, think about the amount of responsibility you have to be the White House doctor. Do you really think you would put the president on a drug that was unsafe? I'm like, hell no. Imagine having that on your resume, killed the president. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, there's no way he, like, and then there's even a story recently. I don't know if Rogan was talking about it. I don't know if it was Brennan Schaub or Brian Callen. They both had the coronavirus, tested positive of late. And one of them was going to talking to their doctor and saying, like, hey, what can you give me, doctor, whatever, what do you think, whatever. And he's like, well, where do you stand politically? And then he's like, well, I don't give a fuck about politics. Just tell me what I can take. And they recommended that drug. And he's like, well, the reason why the doctor didn't want to recommend it was because he's like, if you don't like Trump, you might not want to take it or whatever, this and that. And it's like, that's what's happened, where like everything's become politics. And it's like, when people were saying like, hey, they're demonizing this drug, it wasn't because there were, in many cases, it wasn't because people were supporting Trump or they were supporting this specific drug. It was just trying to expose the fact that Big Pharma is having a huge influence on what's being told to the public and what's being sold to the public. And that's something that people have to be wary of. I mean, you have to put your politics aside. I mean, Big Pharma has over and over and over again. What that blood clot? What was it, Merck or Pfizer? Was it Bayer? No, it was Bayer. Who had the blood clogging drug that had like AIDS in it, and it got banned in the U.S. Then like, well, we can't lose all our profit. Let's sell it in Europe.
Sold it. They sold it in the third world. They do that shit all the time. It's infuriating. People were complaining about the bee population dying from glyphosate. And so Monsanto was taking a big hit from that because, they were obviously responsible for it. So what did they do? They didn't stop, of course. They went out and bought up all of those companies, those companies that were advocating on behalf of the bees. Monsanto just went out and bought them all and put them out of business. So problem solved. Nobody's complaining about our product anymore because we've silenced them. So, people mistakenly make the assumption that these big pharma companies are like, think and go about business in the way that decent human beings do. They do not. They're all convicted felons. Every single one of those organizations, every single one of the big pharma companies has been convicted of felonies. They have all paid out billions of dollars for their products, killing people, for lying about their research and development, for lying about rushing it through safety trials, for lying. They're pathological liars and convicted felons, yet we defer to them on our health. We make this assumption, like you said earlier, that they're nefarious fuckers that have been busted for everything. But when it comes to vaccine, they put the good guys on that case. I mean, that's a totally irresponsible defense for us, or an assumption to make. Like, no, these companies work and act like psychopaths. So why should we defer to them on anything? If they say that, the only thing, I was like you, as soon as hydrochloroquine came out and as a topic of conversation, like in March, I was like, this drug, no matter whether it's effective or not, especially if it is effective, is going to get hammered in the media. They're not going to want anyone to go anywhere near it because, like you said, it's impossible to make money on a 50-cent generic drug. But like we've heard recently, they're talking about how, well, the dosage of so-and-so is going to be more like $3,000. Like, now you're talking. You're going to take free money from the government to rush out a coronavirus vaccine, which won't be effective anyway. And then you're going to charge an astronomical amount of it. And then when it kills everybody or hurts a bunch of people or both, then you hide behind your 1986 vaccine bill that you passed through Congress because you bought a couple corrupt politicians. I mean, their business model, it's impossible for them to lose money, and it's so devious. And yet, you and I make this we have this conversation, or we make statements like this, and what does the average person do? They turn on us. Like, they defend the abuser and they turn on us. Why? Because they don't have an understanding as to what's going on. They make this assumption. Hey, it says World Health Organization. Yeah. Well, they're taking care of the health of the world. So we got to trust them, right? No. They're the worst person in the world. They say World Health Organization to make you think that they're taking care of the health of the world, but they're doing the exact opposite. And it's frustrating to have to go through this, process with everybody that you kind of come in contact with. But this is what we have to do, to keep talking about the insanity of it all.
And to not get sued, it was Bayer. So Merck and Pfizer, please don't sue me. It was Bayer that had AIDS tainted drugs. You can find, if you just look it up, AIDS or HIV and then Bayer drug, you'll find plenty of articles on it. But,
so you're telling me that the company that had infected blood in their AIDS treatments thought it was a good idea to buy Monsanto?
Another great video that I think gets overlooked that James Corbett did.
I knew you were going to go to this.
You're going to say it. Where is it? The Bayer and Monsanto
Match Made in Hell.
Made in Hell. Yes, a great documentary. One. And even at Empire Files, they have a good one on Monsanto, just the history of Monsanto and kind of where they started and all that stuff. And obviously, these are chemical companies. I mean, they don't give a shit about us. They don't care about our food. They don't care about anything. And don't get me wrong. There's probably some good people who work there who are just looking at graphs and making business decisions that don't look at long-term effects on the business, and that's the thing about public companies too, right? I mean, public companies don't really give a shit about long-term decisions. They care about short-term decisions. How do I get quarterly gains and get our stockholders, making money, Yeah, so
but how do you look at yourself in the mirror if you work at Monsanto? I mean, how? Even if you're just answering the phones there, my God, man.
Well, it makes it easier when they change your name.
Yeah. I work at Bayer. They're the ones that make the aspirin. Yeah, they make a lot of other stuff too. They have a long storied history of doing a bunch of stuff that is reprehensible. But GMOs and we've talked about, you and I've talked about Bill Gates and everything and being involved in this. And I don't know that people really understand exactly how deep Bill Gates goes into all these things, but he's one of the largest individual shareholders in Monsanto, which is the creator of GMO food, genetically modified organisms. These are foods that are not real foods, called frankenfoods. They have similar characteristics, but others that are very that are much more dangerous. There's a whole lot of untested studies. And then I take it one step further and remind people that, remember that big seed vault that was built in Svalbard, Norway, that's cut into the side of a mountain and holds like hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of seeds? Bill Gates financed that. So all of the actual seeds in the world that were put in this seed vault in the tundra of Norway, that was financed by Bill Gates. He spent the money to build that place, to put all those seeds there. What do you think he's up to with that? It can't be anything good, right? So we've got all these, we've talked about the vaccine agenda, and he's a big proponent of that, of course, but we've seen a lot of farms where farms like, oh, we've got an infection, and then they cull the whole herd at these farms, or they're shutting down factory farms. They're now starting to push, Gates is starting to push this synthetic breast milk and 3D printing food. KFC's talking about, hey, we're 3D printing nuggets and all. This is like Soylent Green. This is like getting us into this dystopian future. And then when you start to connect these dots and you realize, oh yeah, well, Bill Gates has been involved in the GMO stuff through Monsanto. But then you gotta see the final piece to the puzzle. It's that seed vault where he's got all the original seeds locked away for them, right? We are forced to eat this synthetic food. It seems like a devious, shitty movie that we're living.
Yeah, and the thing about the pharmaceutical industry, I try to tell people over and over again, I'm like, if you think the military-industrial complex has a lot of influence, I'm like, Big Pharma puts them to shame now. They have so much influence and there's so much money. So even when they start doing off-label use, like they start doing that because they're trying to expand their profits. Like, hey, let's find, and when you do an off-label use of a drug, it doesn't have to be FDA approved for that off-label use. So in other words, like if it's approved, FDA approved, which we've already talked about, it's kind of bullshit anyways. So you're already only approved through this bullshit process anyways, and then you can basically write prescriptions for that drug for other reasons that it hasn't even been studied at all, even if the studies are bullshit. So I mean, that stuff happens all the time, and the studies, like, they don't have to release any of the studies that prove that their drugs are unsafe. That's completely, like, there's no law saying that if you come up with studies that prove that it's unsafe, they have to share that. They only have to prove the studies that will help get their stuff FDA approved. And the labs doing this work, they end up building relationships with these pharmaceutical companies because they end up wanting to get those contracts to do these studies because it's big bucks. So it's like you want to give them the results they're looking for, and this happens all the time. And Lipitor is one of the most profitable drugs by Pfizer. There's this story, I think it was in like 2004, where the National Cholesterol Education Program, I think they're called the NCEP. They changed the cholesterol standards. And the reason that was because they understood that if they could give more drugs to healthy people, like there's a bigger market of healthy people than there are sick people. So if we can get our drugs to sick and healthy people, it's like, whoa, that's kind of like vaccines, right? Like what better drug, what better thing to sell than something you can give to everybody, healthy or not healthy, it wouldn't matter, So it's to me, it shows you what's going on. And they changed the standards because they lowered the cholesterol levels, what they considered like, hey, this is when they should suggest a prescription drug, or Lipitor or whatever, at these levels. You keep lowering that, so you're not even at risk. Your risk is very low, and yet they're telling you, here, take a pill, which is toxic to your liver, which has all these other side effects. So it's like you're even if you believe in cholesterol alone has been demonized. Dietary cholesterol has been demonized. Fats have been demonized by the sugar industry and other industries. Like I mentioned, Sugar Coated is a great documentary. There's also a story. It was called like Project 226, and it was a bunch of Harvard scientists that got paid off to basically link heart disease to fat and cholesterol. Yeah. And then, so this type of stuff happens all the time. I mean, this is why the ketogenic diet, when it first got popular, so many people looked at me and the other people who were doing it and then talking about it, and they're like, "You're fucking crazy. Your cholesterol levels are going to go high. Oh my God, it's unhealthy to eat all that fat." And it's like, yeah, because that's what you've been told. But you also were told that on your food pyramid that the majority of what you eat is grains, and which causes inflammation and turns into sugar and all. It has no nutritional benefit or very little. But yet you go down a bread aisle at a grocery store. It gets its own aisle. It's all breads and bagels and wraps and all this stuff. Yep. So it's crazy how people have been tricked. And health to me is one of those topics I'm so passionate about, because when people listen to a show and they hear about these alternatives or how they should how they've been lied to about how they should eat or what they should take or whatnot, it can really change your lives. It changes how much energy you have. It changes your desire to exercise or not feel pain or feel better about yourself. Just being able to lose a little bit of weight or looking healthier. So all these things are super important. So to me, like with these health podcasts I do on my show, if it's Jim Abrams' story or whoever, Dr. Brzezinski, who's the guy who's been, had an alternative treatment to cancer that got demonized. I mean, my podcast was like, nobody listened to my podcast when he was on. I mean, he was like episode 10, and I got tweeted and message after message, and I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, you're worried about him sharing his message on my show? I'm like, I don't even have a platform yet, you know? And but it showed how there is just a well organized plan to make sure that anything out of the norm that's not pushed by these universities and these doctors, and it's not chemical based, then that's all whatever. But yet, the DSM, which has the word science, or it's what does it stand for? It's diagnostic study, whatever, but it's supposed to be scientific, right? And it's here's the pill if you have depression or anxiety or whatever. These are the symptoms you're supposed to have. Completely not science based, completely based on assumptions. It's if your patient is down, unhappy, then give him this pill. He might have this. And then they use these terms like chemical imbalance, but yet the majority of people never get one test for any. I mean, first of all, there is no test to see your chemical imbalance. And even if there was, nobody gets tested. It's you walk in and you walk out with a pill, and it's all based on your dialogue. It's all based on, but being up and down emotionally is all part of being alive. I mean, emotions are what make us human. You're going to be, if you're going through some stressful part of your life, you might be down, but you shouldn't be put on a pill that is supposedly gonna balance the chemical imbalance, even though they never test you to see which chemicals imbalance, how imbalanced it is. So you become a guinea pig of take this pill, see if this works. If that doesn't work, take this. I have a family member that has problems with anxiety and depression, all this stuff, and she becomes a zombie. And when something's not working, they just get her something else, and they give her something else. And I keep telling her, I'm like, dude, be careful. This stuff is not good for you. There's been studies to prove that exercise is better than most prescription drugs. So it's just one of those things where just that's not what they're telling you, because they want to just obviously keep pushing pills.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I learned about years ago that I always that started me thinking that the pharmaceutical industry was filled with con artists and snake oil salesmen is that the pill for depression called Wellbutrin is also marketed, same pill, same identical component. Everything about it is the same, but it's also marketed as Zyban, which gets you to quit smoking. So the depression, the pill for depression, it's they said, well, we've got R&D already sunk into this. We've made some money on it. We've got it for depression. What else can we say it fixes? What other sort of untapped? Let's say it makes you want to stop smoking. All right. Well, does it make you want to smoke? In some people, maybe it does, because maybe now they're not depressed, and so now they're happier. Now they're not smoking, and good enough. Let's run with it. So when you go to the doctor and they give you a prescription from a manufacturing, from a business standpoint, you've already got all the sunk costs in there of research and development and testing and approval and all that. You just slap a brand new name on it, make some new commercials for it, which are generic commercials anyway. It's going to be people dancing in the park or on a yacht or skipping to school or whatever these bullshit commercials are. And then you put Zyban on it, and then it's like, helps you to stop smoking. It's the same exact pill, different name. So once I learned that, I was like, these devious fuckers have figured out a way to just say that it fixes everything, maybe not everything, but to say that it fixes multiple things. And how do they do that? Did they retest it all? No, they didn't retest it. They know the process for getting these things passed. And, even if you've got something that, that turns out to be a product that you get sued for, in a lot of cases, that you get sued, you get settlements, or you get fined or whatever, but you've made so much more money from it that it is well worth the hassle. Like I said, every one of these pharmaceutical companies has been convicted of felonies for having their products kill people and hurt people, and they've paid out billions of dollars because they play that game. Well, if I can generate $1 billion of revenue, and then I got to settle with some people for $150 million, I'm in pretty good shape, And so they look at this as a business transaction, which it is, but they've taken out that additional layer of this is also a medicine. This is also something that you can't be wrong about. You have to really know that you really have to, have some people there, some doctors that are making sure that this is what you say it is. But the problem is everybody running the big pharma, they're all MBAs, but they're not MDs. Not a single one of them. Nobody that's running big pharma right now in a CEO position is a doctor, except for one guy who's a doctor of English. I've said that before in podcasts. So it doesn't even really count. So we've got, the business of sickness is a real thing. Like you said, if they can find a way to give healthy people drugs, vaccines and everything, then that just opens them up to a much broader audience. Not to mention if these vaccines that we give healthy people secretly make them all sick, well, now we've got them as a customer for life. And that is a really devious way. Like Nike wants you as a customer for life, but they do that by selling you this vision that you're going to be like Michael Jordan or you're going to be the cool guy at school. And so that keeps you coming back for more. But Big Pharma does it in a different way. They just convince you to take their drugs that make you really sick. And then they prey on you for a long, long time. And if there's any question to whether or not this is an actual strategy or not, I ask you this: why, if you go to Walgreens or CVS in the middle of winter, will they, with your little swipe card, make it so that your vaccine is free, your flu shot is free, and in some cases they'll pay you $10 to take it? Why on earth would they do that? Because they know there's money in it for it over the long run. Because you're going to take these vaccines, they're not going to fix what's really wrong with you. You're going to come back into this this pharmacy, this drugstore, and buy more shit. And so they're going to make money. It's a really, really rotten. It's a rotten industry.
Yeah, I mean, Viagra was like originally like a blood pressure pill, and then they're like, "Hey, look, it looks like it's doing this too, so let's market it as this." It's like that type of stuff happens all the time, and this is the thing. Like, there's endless stories of pharmaceutical corruption, them misleading their, with science, bad science, hiding science, and yet for some reason, vaccines is the one topic that people just all of a sudden, which is weird because a lot of people who believe the vaccines are not something to be at least a little hesitant about. Or I know a lot of liberals who, and I'm like, wait, I thought you guys were supposed to be like very like hippie, grow your own food, natural, and the remedies, and yet it's like, no, just take these chemicals. I mean, and the crazy thing too, it's like, it's not even a secret. The CDC website you can find on the CDC website the side effects of vaccines. You can find on the inserts, they have to label it there so they don't get directly sued, because I think there's a loophole where if you don't label it there, you can actually get directly sued or something like that. I don't know, but either way, on the inserts, if you ask for it, it'll say all the things we're talking about. neurological issues. I mean, look at the swine flu thing, right? What was it, 1970, whatever it was, where like 4,000 people had neurological issues. Like some died, some got paralyzed, like from this, because they were scaring the public about like this swine flu is the worst flu ever. Here it comes. Everybody, we highly recommend people getting vaccinated. Then 4,000 people had a really injuries or adverse reactions or whatever, and then I think they end up getting like millions of dollars out to these people. And so I mean, this stuff happens all the time. Don't be the guinea pig. I mean, the COVID-19 vaccine, also remember when they're testing it, right, they're testing it on the healthiest of healthy people. They're getting people because they don't want anything to get in the way of their test results, so they're getting people who don't have any health issues, don't have a clean bill of health, they're healthy, they're probably young, healthy people, aren't on any meds or whatnot. Well, guess what? The majority of people who are going to get that vaccine, if they get the vaccine, are going to be on meds, are going to be unhealthy, some pre-existing condition. So it could be even more dangerous than we know for those people. But because the tests don't take that in consideration, then you become a guinea pig. It's like, here, try this, and if you do have an adverse reaction, they're just going to say it was for some other reason. That's the thing. It's like, it's not that hard to cover up. I mean, a lot of people who have kids who got a vaccine and then like maybe had a little bit of a reaction, and next thing you know, they're not developing the way they should be. They don't connect those dots, and a lot of times it's hard to connect those dots or even come to that conclusion, because you don't want to be a parent who believes that something you decided to do to your child or let be done to your child led to this. That's one of the hardest conclusions to come up with. So when people act like parents are crazy who are saying the vaccines cause their kids autism or whatever neurological issue they might have, I'm like, you have to understand, like, these parents, like, that's probably one of the hardest things to just grab and come to terms with, is that a decision you made or didn't make or whatever could have prevented this. And so it just, when people come to that conclusion, it's because all other things have been just fatigued, and you're just like, you know what, like, this has to be it. It's the only thing that makes sense. So I think a lot of times people don't put themselves in the parents' shoes and think about, like, hey, would this be an easy thing to come out to say out loud and go around saying? And because you're not just blaming Big Pharma, you're also in a way putting a little bit of the blame on maybe your lack of research or your lack of knowledge. And that's always my argument. I mean, that's my argument with this the whole time. I do not blame any parent who vaccinates their kid. I don't blame any parent who doesn't vaccinate their kid. People should have the right to make any decision they want, but they need to have all the information. And when one side of the argument is being suppressed, that's what really makes me mad. That's what really gets me upset, is when people are saying, oh, the science is settled, the science is this, and like, oh, this and that. It's like, oh, we know for sure that there's no link. And it's like, no, you don't know anything about the CDC whistleblower. You don't know anything about this court case when the CDC admitted in court that the DTaP vaccine, there's no proof, there's no studies showing that it doesn't cause autism. So it's like, people aren't getting that side of the argument. And when you're a parent and you're making some serious decisions that could affect your life and your children's life, at least get all the information. And then if you come up with the same conclusion, that's okay. Like, that's you. If you think that the risk of them not taking the vaccine, I mean, but again, like, who the fuck needs a Hep B vaccine the day they're born? I mean, that's one of those mandatory vaccines. And it's like, wait, for a sexually transmitted disease, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, why doesn't make any sense? No, I mean, there's vaccines for everything. I remember once, which is hilarious, because I like refuse every vaccine, and then they're like, well, there's this vaccine for what was it? It was diarrhea, and I'm like, wait. So I'm like, I told you I don't want that vaccine. I don't want any vaccines, and you think you can talk me into the diarrhea vaccine? Like, my kid might not get diarrhea, and if they do, like,
we'll deal with it.
Who cares? We'll just hydrate them. I'm like, I don't understand. Like, what's why? Like, it was so crazy. But I mean, so many parents, they see that PhD, they see that they're a doctor, they see the plaque on the wall. They're like, oh, they must know something. What they don't understand is the root of their information is all influenced by pharmaceutical companies. I mean, who's giving the money, the funding? I mean, that's why the history of the Flexer report and how that changed things, and that was funded by the Carnegie Foundation, and so it just, you have to see when chemical companies are directly having links to the FDA, links to these universities and where they're getting funding, all this stuff, these nonprofit organizations, like you have to be skeptical of all of it, and they have little to no knowledge on diet and nutrition. But yet we all agree if you eat healthy, you feel better and you have health benefits. Well, if you take vitamins and you take root extracts and teas and all these things that are natural, like that, then why can't we admit that stuff's good for you? So if I say vitamin C is bad for you or good for you, that's dangerous. That's disinformation, misinformation. Right. But if I just say, hey, if you eat vegetables and fruits and things that are good for you and have nutrition and vitamins, that's okay. But so it's like, it doesn't even make any sense. It's like, if vitamins didn't work, then that means eating healthy didn't work, because most of the time you can make the argument that some vitamins, they're misleading. They say they have something that they don't have, all that type of stuff. But I think in general, the theory of like your body needs a little bit more vitamin C to help maybe strengthen a weak immune system, or might need more of this or that, glucosamine or MSM, whatever it may be for inflammation or your joint pain. Like that should be like that shouldn't be something dangerous to say. But you know, a lot of people are going to listen to this and say, these fucking idiots aren't doctors. Well, guess who's also not a doctor? The Bill Gates, who's being interviewed everywhere about vaccines and health issues in Africa. Like, what the fuck, man? Like, why is that dude being interviewed, and why is that okay? So for people listening, just we know we're not doctors. Yeah, we're not pretending to be doctors. In fact, if anything, I'm not saying that we're better than doctors, but we bring something to the table, which is we can be objective. We're not trying to run a medical practice. I don't have to answer to Big Pharma. I'm not licensed. I don't have to worry about all my life. I'm not worried about saying something inconsistent with. So I can be objective, and I can look at this information and I can come up with how I view it. Whereas doctors are heavily influenced by the pharmaceutical industry when they go through med school. They're taught that, this is the way it's done. Oh, that stuff over there, that's quackery. That, that's that holistic stuff, that's airy-fairy stuff. And like, one of the indicators that this whole coronavirus situation was a bunch of dog shit was that never did I hear, not once to this day have I heard on the nightly news or any news source, that I need to, in the absence of this vaccine, you should at the very improve your health, go get exercise, eat vitamins, drink fresh water, get lots of sunlight. I haven't heard any of that. I haven't heard any of that. The only thing I have heard is vaccine. That's all I've heard. So you can tell it's about money. If hydrochloroquine wasn't even, was demonized when it was having promising results, demonized. Why? Like we talked about, because it's a generic. What about eating healthy and vitamins? Not talked about. Why? Because you can't make any money off of that. Big Pharma can't, but they can on vaccines. And I will say this, that the science is not settled, but the agenda certainly is. So, Ricky, tell these people where they can find you if they want to find Ripple Effect. Where is it? Yeah, so it's everywhere. Spotify, it's on iTunes, Google Play, everywhere you can get podcasts. You can get the Ripple Effect podcast. Just look up the Ripple Effect podcast. I also have a YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, and there you can see video versions of all our episodes. You can, if a guest calls in using video, you can visually see us have the conversation. I'm also on Instagram, Parlay. I don't know how to pronounce it. And what else? I'm on Twitter. It's all RV Theory 6. The Ripple Effect podcast also has a Facebook page, so you can look that up. I'm on Facebook. If you guys want to connect with me directly, you can just look up my name, Ricky Varandas or Ricardo Varandas, and just let me know. Send me a little message. Let me know that you're not a bot or trying to send me porn links or whatnot. And then and I'll take the friend request and we can connect. And I love connecting with the guests. But a couple of things we talked about that I want people to definitely check out. Definitely check out the Vax documentary, like we mentioned, if you haven't seen it yet. The Big Secret, the Rockefeller Medicines by Corbett. Same thing with his Bill Gates documentary when we were talking about how much influence he has. I think everybody who watches that documentary will be surprised just how far that octopus legs go, and how much influence he has in so many different things, and so those are definitely some things I would highly recommend people. And also Sugar Coated, The Case Against Sugar, the book by Gary Tops is really good. All these things are super important. And also there's one called Making a Killing, about the DSM and antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs, which is good too. So definitely check all that stuff out, because don't take our word for it. You can do your own research. The reason why I'm giving you the actual titles, because I know how hard it is to do your own research. So if you actually have a title to look up specifically, it might be a little easier. Yeah. So, but thank you so much, Charlie, for having me on. Hopefully I talk to you Monday the 3rd, and coming up.
We'll be doing another Union of the Unwanted, and this once again, since I talked about the sponsor early on, but given the topics that we were covering, check out Chemical Free Body, Tim James's company, and see what they have to offer. I mean, we're talking about getting your body right, getting your health right. He's done some interesting work there, and if you want to buy anything there, use the promo code Macro.
Yeah, he's been on my show too. Yeah, he's been on my show, and I'm actually planning on having him back on, because I wanted to kind of get like a little roundtable discussion, get him and another somebody that you could talk to that's awesome, Dr. Kendra Becker. She was at the Red Pill Expo. I got to know her through Richard Grove, and she's like, oh, you would love Dr. Kendra Becker, and I ended up having her on my show, and then she was on again during the lockdown, and just super knowledgeable, and she's like, you know how it is. Like if we're saying this shit, people don't take it as seriously. If somebody who their name is Dr. Kendra Becker, and if it was Dr. Ricky Varandas or Dr. Charlie Robinson, people might take our advice more seriously. So when you talk to her and she's saying all the same things we're saying, I think it gets people's attention a little more, and she's super knowledgeable. But I'm planning on getting her and Tim James together, and maybe some other people in the health and nutrition world, and kind of talking about these things. And I love getting groups of people together. I think it's fun. Yeah. And hopefully we'll keep doing it. It seems like the Union of the Unwanted is going to end up being, my phone's always listening to me. I just turned on for no reason, but the Union of Unwanted, it seems like it's going to grow into its own thing. And I think so people are going to really look forward to specifically those shows, hopefully as much as we do, because I love to see who's going to, and who's going to make me a liar again. Thanks, Whitney. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Whitney. It's Ricky Varandas. He's the best. Check out his stuff, and we appreciate. Share this show with everybody. Get the word out there. Get us deplatformed as quickly as possible. It's going to happen. You might as well get it done right away. Thanks, Ricky. For
Hey, thanks, Charlie. Hey, I really appreciate it. Take care, Charlie.